So our forum today is hosted by the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we work to influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our topic, juvenile justice reform. Where are we? A year ago, the Michigan Task Force on Juvenile Justice Reform released 32 recommendations for reform of our state's juvenile justice system. Jason Smith was a member of that task force, and he is also Executive Director of the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. He's here with us today. Welcome, Jason. We're very glad to have you joining us. Thank you for this. We will be exploring today what changes are underway of those 32 recommendations, what requires more advocacy, and how can we help move these things forward. During Jason's presentation, I'm going to invite you to submit any of your questions in the chat that as they occur to you. We will explore your questions following his remarks, and League of Women Voters member Maggie Bayless is going to be monitoring chat and assisting with this Zoom session. Maggie, do you have any guidelines for folks?
I just want to welcome everyone today. And yes, when you put your questions into the chat, if you can make sure that they go to everyone, then I will capture them and we'll get them asked at the end of the session. So thanks, Susan.
All right, great. I also wanted to note that with us today is AC Jane. She is the leader of the Juvenile Justice Advocacy Team here at the League of Women Voters for Washtenaw County. Thank you, Jane, for your leadership and continued enthusiasm and prompting. Appreciate it.
Jason, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today to be here bright and early. And thank you, Susan Randall and Jason Smith and Maggie as well for your work this morning.
So a little about our presenter. Jason Smith comes to this work with deep experience in youth service. Early in his career, he was a direct care provider in transitional home for adjudicated girls. Then he was a manager in a Wayne County's juvenile justice system. And later he was a co-manager of the youth diversion program in Skokie, Illinois. He was a 2011 fellow with the Youth Justice Leadership Institute, which is at the National Juvenile Justice Network. He is a graduate of Michigan State University and has a master's in social work from the University of Michigan. Jason, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everybody for joining this morning. The Michigan Center for Youth Justice is based in Ann Arbor, and I'm an Ann Arbor resident, so I'm so happy to be able to keep my community updated on juvenile justice issues. So thanks again to the League of Women Voters in Washtenaw County for hosting this event and this opportunity. So as Susan mentioned, the Juvenile Justice Task Force approved 32 recommendations. Some of them require statute changes, others are really focused on changing department policies at the state level. I'm going to really dig into the legislative statutes that are currently being discussed right now in Lansing that we hope to see advanced by the end of the year. And then I'll touch on a couple of those department changes too, and then get into where things land and how you all can help. So I'm going to share my screen, and we tried this a minute ago, so I think I know the percentage to put it at so folks can see. Oh, I think it already is. Okay, so the legislation it has been both introduced in the House and the Senate. Their House bills 4624 and Senate Bill 418 through House Bills 4643 and Senate Bill 437. And there's an interactive webpage on the Michigan Center for Youth Justice website that you can actually go and click through the links and see the actual bills, see where they are. It opens up the Michigan Legislature's website, so you can actually see where the legislation is in the process, any amendments made, and so on. So these same hyperlinks that you see here are also available on our website too. So the legislation that's being prioritized this session, or this year at least, are really focused on structural changes to the overall juvenile justice system. If you read the report or any of the media that's come out since the final recommendations were released, you know that part of the goal of advancing this legislation was to create more standards of care in the juvenile justice system. One of the issues that we have is that policies and practices are often implemented inconsistently across the state. So we have an issue that we often call justice by geography, where a young person's experience can really vary depending on where they live in the state, and that can dictate a whole range of things related to the juvenile justice system, where funding is allocated for, what types of community-based services there are, the level of, or the amount of services in a continuum of care or menu of services offered to young people in a jurisdiction, the use of detention or out-of-home placement, length of stay. A lot of things really can depend county by county. And so one of the main goals here is to create, again, more standards of practice while still allowing for innovation and community-focused treatment that's often required in a decentralized system as Michigan has, where a lot of the decisions around the everyday practice in juvenile justice is done at a county level, county by county. So just doing a quick run through of the legislation. Again, both of these, the issues that I'm going to touch on have bills introduced both in the House and Senate, and I'll get into kind of where things are. So the first thing is the Child Care Fund. So Child Care Fund, just a quick reminder, is the state's primary source for juvenile justice. Juvenile courts and the counties that fund them pay the cost for community-based care and out-of-home placement. So juvenile justice system treatment upfront. And then they're reimbursed at 50% by the state for eligible expenditures. The proposed legislation in front of us is to increase the reimbursement rate for community-based services to 75%, to incentivize the use of community-based services, which yield better outcomes for the most part for young people in the juvenile justice system, are more cost-effective. You can serve 10 kids for the price of one kid in out-of-home placement in effective community-based care. It's cheaper for the state to reimburse, so it's really a win-win for all. In addition to that reimbursement rate change, there's additional pieces in this legislation that would require the use of evidence-based programming that have been proven to work and yield good outcomes, require the use of risk and need screening tools or assessment tools to determine things like the use of detention or diversion. And it requires counties to hire local quality assurance specialists to ensure that they're adhering to the evidence-based practices that they're supporting. I would say that there is an exception on that last piece for rural counties that have a population under 75,000. One more piece about this. So another great thing about this legislation is that it would expand the definition of community-based care. So beyond just services that a young person receives in the home, it would allow for emergency shelter or respite care to be considered a community-based program and being reimbursed at that 75% rate. So young people for whom there may be an issue where they need to be temporarily removed from the home while issues are sorted out there or some sort of safety plan is put into place, can remain in a community-based setting, a least restrictive setting, and still the jurisdictions are reimbursed at that 75% rate. Or if there's an issue where a young person, right now we have situations where kids are placed in detention where beds are often scarce around the state for various reasons, that are able to go home. Even the court has determined that they're able to go home, but they can't for whatever reason. Either the family won't take them home, and there's multiple reasons for that. or their families dealing with housing instability themselves. This would allow a young person who does not require, because of any lack of a safety concern, they can be placed in again, a community-based setting instead of detention. Second one is expanding the Juvenile Diversion Act. And so this is the law that really governs the use of informal or formal diversion in the juvenile justice system. It would expand the eligibility for diversion. It changes the rules. So right now, the law prohibits any kind of assaultive crime to be eligible for diversion. So think of a felonious assault that may be like a school fight or something like that, where I've heard from court administrators that there are situations where even with those types of offenses, they feel like they could successfully divert a child to services and they'll be successful without formal court supervision. These changes would allow for offenses like that to be eligible for diversion. It's not required. It just allows judges and courts to have the discretion to divert those youth. It would change that assault of crime definition to just prohibit offenses that are what they call specified juvenile violations. So these are your more serious offenses that prosecutors, if they choose, and they currently have the discretion to, can transfer a child to the adult system. So think, your serious sexual crimes, homicide, armed robbery, things like that. So still, where there's overlap around that assaultive crime list, where there's some of those serious offenses on there, those would still be prohibited from diversion. They could still be placed on probation. Doesn't mean that they necessarily have to go to the adult system. Again, that's up to the discretion of some of the justice stakeholders. All this is doing is expanding so that more offenses can be eligible for diversion. And again, courts and those who are making the decision around diversion would be using these risk screening tools and mental health screening tools too to help inform their diversion decision making. This would also allow for the child care fund that I highlighted earlier to cover pre-arrest diversion. So right now, a jurisdiction, can only be reimbursed by the child care fund if a petition has been filed with the court. If a child has been officially charged with an offense and that petition has been filed with the juvenile court. This change would allow for pre-arrest diversion or referrals being sent to the court so that a young person can participate in diversion programs much more earlier upstream and have those programs funded by the child care fund. Next bit of legislation would change the Diversion Act to limit the amount of time a young person can be placed on diversion to 3 months. We know just from research we've done in the past and just talking to juvenile justice stakeholders around the state that, again, this is an issue where practice might be a bit inconsistent. We've heard situations where the typical term length that a kid who's on diversion, who, keep in mind, these are young people who people have determined are low risk to reoffend, usually first time kids who are interacting with the justice system, who they're diverting out to services and expecting not to see again. We've heard situations where like 90 days or 3 months is the standard term length. And then I've heard up to a year or 2 years for kids participating on diversion, which is, more like probation, official probation than diversion. And any kind of mess up over that amount of time could lead to a young person falling deeper into the system. So again, standardizing practice here with the allowance for extending that diversion if a young person's in a specific treatment program that requires it. So if they're in a program that runs for 6 months, things are going well, you can extend that diversion then. This next one is, I kind of went over it, but essentially would, again, require courts to use risk and needs assessments prior to disposition, which is the equivalent of sentencing in the juvenile justice system, to help determine case planning. Level of placement, whether a kid can be placed at home or needs to go to detention or a longer term residential treatment facility and what their treatment plan looks like to really drive case planning. And it requires that that the young people are reassessed every 6 months or during a major change to life. An example of that is young person who, let's say, completes a treatment program or goes to a residential treatment program out of the home. Once they successfully complete that program and return to the community or prior to, they'd be reassessed, for example, to update their treatment plan and their risk level. Consent calendar, as you see, House Bill 4628 to 422. Consent calendar is another version of diversion, a bit more formal. It's considered an informal docket of the juvenile court. Some courts utilize consent calendar for like a step between probation and very informal diversion. So it allows kids to have a bit more supervision and access a few more programs possibly than kids who are on very informal diversion are able to access, but may not require the full length of a probation term or all the intensive supervision that a probation term uses. So similar to informal diversion, it would require risk screening tools and mental health screening tools to help inform decisions around consent calendar. Is there any questions so far in the chat? I can't see it while I share my screen. And
Yes, we do have one.
sure.
What was the objection to allow judges to have discretion even in the specified juvenile offenses for diversion?
Oh, well, so it's the specified offenses, that's just a state law that it allows for prosecutors to have the discretion to transfer to the adult system. So it's really more than changing who has the discretion to decide whether to transfer a young person to the adult system. I'm not sure if I'm answering this question correctly, but it was more just updating the offense list than anything. If I didn't answer that correct, please follow up with additional
Carolyn, that question was from Carolyn Madden. Carolyn, if that.
Yeah, Jason, I just meant, why wasn't it even considered for diversion, that maybe some of the more serious crimes, maybe I worded it wrong, I didn't mean judges, but for diversion? I mean, it could be a case that there's a youth that's young and diversion would help them, but that was not part of the discussion.
Yeah, well, it was, and I would say that the recommendation was to expand diversion to allow for more offenses, and then this is what the legislation kind of narrowed on. I'll say that there is some, even with this change to get rid of the assaultive offenses list and use just those specified violations, there's been pushback on that by some groups like the Sheriff's Association and others who wanted it to stay the same as the current law is, and just allow for all assaultive crimes to be prohibited. So this was more of, I think, a compromise amongst a lot of the stakeholder groups that negotiated this legislative language. And, hopefully it stays as is, but you never know as legislation moves.
Jason, I've got a couple other questions. Would you like to take them now, or would you rather keep going? And
yeah, I'll just run through these really quickly, and then I can answer these and then get into where the kind of things are. So again, like this is, I mentioned this in terms of other legislation, but it requires the use of a detention screening tool to help inform decisions around placing youth in secure detention, to make sure that we're limiting detention to those kids who cannot be safely and effectively treated in the community. We don't want young people who are placed in detention that are low risk to reoffend or not public safety risk at all, which can disrupt just their successful treatment in the community and connections with school and any other pro-social things that they have going on. This 4630 and Senate Bill 424 would expand the standards of the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission to include standards related to representation of youth. When it was first set up, the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission and its standards were limited to focused on only adults in the criminal justice system. And so this would expand those standards to include considerations for juvenile justice, including requirements around training for youth counsel, making sure that they have resources, and it would add a member that has expertise in the juvenile justice system to the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. 4630, Senate Bill 425, would allow for the state appellate defender's office to oversee a system of appellate defense for youth. And again, adds a member that's interested and has expertise in youth justice to the Appellate Defender Commission. 4632 and Senate Bill 426 would change the rules to allow for the Department of Health and Human Services to change per diem rates in child caring institutions, so your juvenile residential facilities, change their per diem rates as needed so that they can be flexible in supporting funding for these facilities to support issues like bed rates, supporting staff recruitment, things like that, to ensure that if there is a need for out-of-home placement, which we hope will reduce over time, especially with this change for the reimbursement rate at the community-based level, that there'll be opportunities for those the right beds to exist, and that the treatment is high quality. And then next is legislation that would revise the factors to be considered in making waiver or designation determinations to align them with what is developmentally appropriate. So this is legislation that would require or expand the mitigating factors that a judge considers when deciding whether or not to transfer a young person to the adult system. So right now, there's a range of factors, such as their age, their history and treatment, mental health, things like that. But no factor has greater weight in the determination of transferring a young person to the adult system than the seriousness of their offense and their history of their record. This would not change that weighting. Those two things would still have the greater weight. It would just expand the factors that a judge must consider in addition to those before making that issue or transferring a young person to the adult system. There's a range of bills, both in the House and Senate, that covers the issue of juvenile court fines and fees. I've shared in presentations with the League of Women Voters in the past that this is something that my organization is very passionate about and was advocating for pre-Juvenile Justice Task Force. And we were so happy that it was included as one of the recommendations by the task force and voted on unanimously by many of the justice stakeholders, but including people who were directly impacted by the system. So this would stop the assessment and collection of most juvenile court fees except for restitution and the victim rights or crime victims fund. So we're hoping that this will have transformative change in the juvenile justice system. We've heard even from juvenile court stakeholders that they feel that assessing huge charges on families is a barrier to effective engagement and treatment. And so a lot of counties have already taken the steps to eliminate the assessment and collection of juvenile court fees on their own, and we hope that we see more. But hopefully this legislation will make those changes permanent. And then I think these are the last two parts of the bill package really focus on the Office of the Children's Ombudsman, which is actually the legislation would change the name of that office to the Office of the Child Advocate. So this office investigates complaints made by youth or families or individuals working in juvenile justice facilities. They investigate those and ensure that the young person is made whole or harm is repaired, but also that whomever is required to be held accountable is. for any actions, or that the system changes, or the facility makes changes to avoid repeated issues in the future. This is separate than license violations that the state or the Department of DHHS does when their oversight of juvenile justice facilities. These are purely triggered by complaints made by young people. Can turn into a violation, but just it expands the oversight to ensure that all facilities are under the auspices of this child Office of the Child Advocate. All right, I think that is it. Happy to, yes, I can share this document with you. I'll send it to the team, and you all can share it out, because it's on a Google Drive now. I'd rather give you guys like a PDF version of it.
Awesome. And then the term least restrictive setting, is that a defined term in the juvenile justice system?
It is. I would have to find. I mean, I just know it from the work. It is defined in state law somewhere. I could try to help locate that. But essentially, yes, the goal is in the juvenile justice system to treat young people in the least restrictive setting possible, primarily in their family's home. But that also can be used to define placement out of the home as well. In the juvenile justice system, you have short-term detention, which is similar to county jails, right, where kids are placed short-term after they're arrested or picked up on a warrant or a court order, or while they're awaiting trial, or while they're awaiting longer-term residential treatment programs. Those detention facilities are of course high secure, but the residential treatment programs where they may end up can really vary in security level. So again, you can have low security level facilities that are more like camps with cabins and things like that, to your more high secure facilities that look almost like prisons. The goal is to ensure that they are in treatment programs as much as possible in the least restrictive setting.
Thank you. So question saying, since most of juvenile justice is run at the county level, could you talk a little about how the Washtenaw County specific recommendations from the WEP support and expand on the statewide changes? And what can we do to advocate for improvements at the county level?
You know what, I'm sorry, I don't have the WEP report in front of me. So I can't compare the recommendations to those. And I'm on the subcommittee too. I'll have to get back about that one. But I would say that one piece of advocacy that's important, county by county, the thing with implementing let's say that all this legislation passes like we hope. Every county is going to be in different places in regards to implementation. One example is risk assessments. Some counties already have been using risk and needs assessments for years and do it to fidelity and really use it to drive their case planning. Some use it, it's questionable how effective it is and helping determine the trajectory of a young person in the system. Some don't use any at all. Some use a tool that they created in-house. I think that what Washtenaw County could do is kind of line up these recommendations with questions that they want to ask their stakeholders, whether it's county commissioners, folks that are in the justice stakeholders group, the juvenile justice stakeholders, to see where we are in terms of these recommendations. And then the thing that we've been really pushing all local jurisdictions to look at is advocacy around expanding the funds that are contributed to the child care fund. Ultimately, the benefit is providing increased savings from the 75% change that the county will see. If you have a robust menu of community-based services, if you're continuing to reduce the number of kids in out-of-home placement, the county should see savings from this reimbursement change. And I've already talked to juvenile court administrators that are anticipating that. The more funds invested into the child care fund, the more you can expand that community-based care. And the savings then can be used, for a range of things. But one of the things that we hope is that it can be used to reinvest into more preventative programs, things that may not be covered by the child care fund, but can serve young people more broadly, even before there's a need for a referral or a complaint being placed with the court to access those child care fund dollars for services. So that's really some of the advocacy that could start now, really pick up once these bills move or signed into law. But it's something that we're really advocating for, is to ensure that local jurisdictions don't tell the justice system that you're getting 75% reimbursement now, make that work for your total budget, but to actually increase investments to take this opportunity to expand their continuum of care.
So of all those different bills that are in the package, are there some that you feel are likely to be sort of the big fights versus easy wins? Or do you think they're all likely to pass?
I think that they're all likely to pass. There may be amendments or changes that have to be debated, and we'll fight for the most progressive reforms possible, because ultimately we think that it yields the best outcomes for kids. But as opposed to things that we, for example, at MCYJ have been involved with in the past, we have the benefit of this being supported by a consensus of stakeholders. So I wish if you saw the minutes from the hearings where this legislation was debated and folks testified, to see the associations and the groups that have signed in to support this legislation, the Prosecutors Association, even with the concerns around the diversion language, the Sheriff's Association supports the child care fund changes and fines and fees and things like that. The Michigan Association for County, who's often, when they push back on legislative reforms around juvenile justice, their concern is how that impacts revenue to counties. They support eliminating fines and fees because they understand that any kind of revenue loss from that is backfilled by these child care fund changes. So more than anything I've worked on in the past, I feel confident that some iteration of this legislation will pass because of the amount of support behind us, especially the child care fund piece. Like that is, I ran through all of these things and they're all very important, but that is truly going to be transformative. Other states like Illinois, Ohio, they have passed laws in previous years that changed their funding model to support community-based care in the same way, and they show great results from it. And I think the same thing for this. Researchers will be looking at the system for years to come, pre and post that child care fund change.
So are there any significant lobbies sort of working against this, or not really?
No. I mean, I think that you see different groups, associations, or lobbying groups weighing in on specific aspects of the legislation, and then there are some groups who may support some over more enthusiastically over others. But there honestly is not like a huge pushback, again, because all of those groups, sheriffs and the ones I mentioned, were represented by the task force, and they had members on the task force. And so you may have down the line some random judge or some random stakeholder who may oppose the legislation for various reasons, but by and large the stakeholder groups that represent the folks interested in juvenile justice have bought into these reforms. And I would say that even though I'm really defining this legislation as transformative, they were more, I won't say the low-hanging fruit, but the things that had the strongest consensus, I would say, of a lot of the recommendations that require statute change. And so these bills were introduced last legislative session and just didn't get a lot of traction because it was so soon after the vote, and various other reasons around prioritization in the legislature. But people knew that these were the ones that we were going to focus on in the first initial year post the task force. And so we haven't seen, and I've been included on all the email threads with all the stakeholders who are going through amendments and things like that. And there just isn't, significant pushback by any association group on the bill package in its entirety, I would say.
That's good news. Thank you. Where will the Office of Child Advocate be housed? And in particular, what oversight structure and level of independence will this advocate have?
So I think it's a separate office. I have to look again. I'm not sure if it's housed in Laura. I'll have to double check that, where it's actually housed. I know that the goal was for it to be independent from DHHS. They're allowed to do investigations. They're allowed to report information to the legislature and create individual reports that can be made public. They're able to speak to the media as well. So the goal was to have it as independent as possible. I think that, this is something that we as supporters of youth justice reform and a fair and effective system has to ensure that it has the oversight and independence that it needs once this legislation passes. Make sure that the people who are running that office have the resources that they need, but also that hold them accountable. Make sure that they are actually investigating complaints as they should. And, I would also say, make sure that facilities are truly are allowing young people some sort of vehicle to make complaints that in a safe way that doesn't result in any kind of retaliation or anything like that.
So several questions about if these pass, it looks like it will, implementation will happen at the county level. And so how, we're sort of all about community support. So what can we do to help at the county level to make sure that the resources are there and that things get followed through?
I think, well, League of Women Voters and the JJ committee has done a good job of connecting with people who work for the court and inviting them in for discussions. I think keeping those lines of communications open to hear from them about how they plan to implement these task force recommendations. I already saw in the chat that someone said that the juvenile court already uses risk and needs assessment. So I think, again, having some sort of level setting conversation about where the county currently stands with their policies and practices and where they would need to change to adhere to these recommendations, I think is important. And then where there may be a need for support, whether it's with the county commission or helping to expand community-based programming or alternatives to court involvement if we're trying to expand diversion. That's another place that community members can play a role, is supporting grassroots organizations or community organizations to be able to provide services to young people at a greater scale than maybe they already do, or to get the funding or resources to be then sustained by the child care fund change down the road. Remember, this is a reimbursement model, so there for a lot of program or service expansion, there may need seed money or funds to help launch or expand existing programming too. So I think that's really the ways in which that communities can play a role here.
Okay, and then the last question that I've got here is about what the Office of the Child Advocate can investigate, and specifically if they receive a complaint about education, sort of lack of it or quality of education, would the law allow them to investigate such a complaint?
I believe so. I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I don't have the specifics in front of me. I'm trying to think if it even determines. It just says that it can file a complaint without giving specifics about like what type of complaints they can investigate. yeah, I just did a quick glance of the legislation, and I don't believe that it goes into specifics about the type of complaints that a young person can file,
Okay,
or others.
we just got another question. Are there other recommendations that may come forward after this bill package that that we need to start laying groundwork for that might be harder?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So all of the recommendations were voted on unanimously, except for one or two related to juvenile competency, the age in which we determine a young person's presumed to be incompetent to stand trial, and align with that minimum age of juvenile court jurisdiction. Right now, Michigan doesn't have a minimum age, and so a young person of any age, 7-year-old, can be placed in the juvenile justice system when it's clear that they're incompetent to stand trial. I think that the hangup was really around uncomfortability with some of the justice stakeholders with allowing certain offenses, trying to think of some, but like really serious offenses not being considered for a juvenile court jurisdiction. I think that this is an issue that has to be consistently studied. Like, one of the problems that we had going through the task force process is the lack of statewide data, which we're hoping will improve over time. State Court Administrative Office received a lot of money to establish a statewide case management system so that we would have better data. But even looking at the number of the different age ranges of young people who participate in the juvenile justice system, what are their offenses? What are their outcomes for recidivism and any other outcome you want to track from participating in the juvenile justice system? I think that for some of the more, if you want to define them as progressive reforms, it's going to require more statewide education on these issues to get buy-in from some of the justice stakeholders to support these reforms, but also make the case to the legislature as well. Again, with the things that are advancing right now, I really view them as the foundations to be able to do more things like that in the future. Another issue that was debated heavily in the context of diversion was status offenses. So these are crimes that are only offenses based on a young person's status as a youth. So think of school truancy or curfew violations or incorrigibility, for example. There was some concern amongst people either in the work groups or in the voting members that if you diverted status offenses entirely from the juvenile justice system, there would not be adequate services to address them that in the same way that the juvenile court can. I think as you see pre-arrest diversion programs expand, as you see hopefully local jurisdictions using savings to expand their preventative services, the case can be more strongly made that there are off-ramps, adequate off-ramps in every community to serve these kids who we believe and research shows don't really benefit from intensive court supervision, that they can be handled more informally. So I think that over time, with the implementation of the legislation in front of us, it'll allow for us to expand and consider more things. And we'll see what, in an election year is always tough to advance things. So we'll see what the opportunities are next year. But in the years to come, I for sure think that we'll be revisiting more legislation.
Thank you. Well, that's all the questions in the chat. So Susan, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, so we have some additional time before the top of the hour when we will be signing off. And I'd like to say, if there's someone that would like to pose the question by speaking themselves, just press the under reactions, raise your hand, and there's an opportunity for you to ask your questions directly to Jason at this point. And while we're waiting for that, a possible interest, I just wanted to say, Jason, thank you for shining the light on things that are before us, work we have to do here at the county level. I appreciated your lifting up the importance of us both watching and working with county leaders to make sure that we don't actually decrease our investments in services to the youth in our county because of the change in the child care fund reimbursing our county at 75%. Like that really gives us an opportunity then to shift dollars to more early intervention services. So but that's going to take some advocacy to make sure that we're paying attention and that our county officials are aware of that and paying attention. And I also heard the importance of paying attention to the implementation of the Office of Child Advocate and making sure that as it's implemented, that young people who might be impacted in a care facility actually have opportunities to express their complaints in a safe way, and that there is independence in the ability of that child advocate to follow up on any complaints that come their way.
Yes.
So some advocacy work there too.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, I hope that we do another one of these in January or so when the bills are actually into law, so we can talk about what was passed at the end of the day with any kind of amendments, and then we can really talk about preparation at that point, so we'll know what the final law is. I do want to say, kind of talk about where we are in progress with the legislation. So all of these bills, everything that I've highlighted, have passed out of the various committees that they were introduced in the House and Senate. Both the House Criminal Justice Committee and the House Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, I mean the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. You know, stark difference from last year, and I think a lot of that had to do with the election and the change. We, you know, couldn't get a hearing in the House, which was the only chamber that introduced the bills last year, to a point where the committee chairs of the two committees were actually lead bill sponsors and really prioritize advancing this legislation. And so we're hopeful, we're hearing that the Senate may vote on their bills first, and maybe either the end of this week or next, and then the House should follow suit. We're doing a lot of work to ensure that that there's broad support in the legislature for these bills. We've done education with the committee members to prepare them for the votes, and now really extending and getting support from the broad range of House and Senate legislators. There was an op-ed recently in Bridge Magazine that was authored by 2 Republican legislators in the Senate, supporting the legislation, to really highlight that this is something that should be bipartisan in nature, which it really should, with the stakeholders supporting this behind it. And also another way that you all can contribute is, again, on our website, there's an email template that you don't even have to do anything or fill anything out. Just put in your information, and it will be sent directly to all of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We originally had those email templates just go to the committee members, and as the bills progress, we expanded out further to touch as many legislators as possible. Once we get through this part of things, we'll change that letter so that it goes to the governor's office, so that she's encouraged to sign it.
Great. So I see no hands up. Am I missing anything, Maggie?
There.
Yeah, go ahead, unmute yourself and go for your question, Kathy.
Hi, I just put in the chat a question. It's slightly off point, but I have heard that there may be progress on eliminating fines and fees for juveniles. And I was wondering if you could comment on that because it's a smaller demographic group than adult fines and fees, and because there may be progress in this area, and it's the whole fines and fees and how courts are supported is such a huge, it has a huge impact on people, and the changes would also. I was wondering if you could comment in the juvenile area at all. Like I said, it's slightly off point, but very related.
No, it's not off point. So it's one of the issues highlighted in the bill package. and it moved unanimously as a task force recommendation, and it was voted out of committee with the rest of the issues. And one that, again, of all the amendments and things that we've heard concerns about, actually have not heard many about the juvenile court fines and fees legislation. One of the issues, if I could just quickly highlight about fines and fees in the juvenile justice system, is that the biggest driver of fees, the largest amounts that you often see families have to pay, is related to the cost of care and services, and primarily, so that can be cost of treatment in the community, probation, things like that. But it's also fees related to their stay in detention or longer term residential care. And assessment and collection, just like everything else that we've discussed around the juvenile justice system, can really vary county by county. The amount assessed, the percentage that of whatever the service is, a youth or their family is required to pay, and the aggressiveness in which it's collected can really vary. But a lot of the counties who even agree that charging families for out of home placement, which can be the entire per diem rate that a county is charged for a facility stay, which can be hundreds of dollars a day. They say that they want to stop it, but they can't because the state law requires them to seek that reimbursement for that. So this law change would change that to eliminate that requirement. Yeah,
Part of the issues that has been raised with fines and fees generally, and I don't know how much that applies to juvenile, like you were talking about, is that for instance, the courts in many areas, adult courts are funded in varying percentages off of fines and fees.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if that was true of juvenile courts.
So again, it depends on like aggressiveness of collection and ability to pay, which again can vary and is inconsistent across counties. But what I've heard is that it's the amount that's assessed, differs greatly from what's actually collected at the end of the day. And it's difficult for any county to really, juvenile court, to budget or prepare or plan their budget around what they expect to receive in juvenile court fees. As you said, it's a much smaller population, and then it's just a percentage of those who then are actually assessed fees too. And again, for most jurisdictions, they're expecting the savings that they receive from this change in reimbursement to far exceed any kind of revenue that they receive from juvenile
From
court.
the child care fund increase.
Yep,
Yes.
yep, yeah, and I've even heard in some circumstances that some juvenile courts found that they actually they were spending more money running the reimbursement division to collect the fees than they were actually bringing in revenue for collecting. So there's, for a range of reasons, we're hopeful that this law change will pass and that it won't be a practice that happens widely here.
Thank
So
you.
I'd like to
It's
thank
such a
you,
big
Kathy.
issue.
Thank you, Kathy, for those comments. And then I just wanted to note again that at the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, as Jason mentioned, there is access to hyperlinks to these various bills and also to the opportunity to send a letter or a message of support to your lawmakers. And I wanted to commend you, Jason. Your organization has a really robust website making it possible to do these things. I did send my messages to the lawmakers recently, and it went very smoothly, and I've started to get responses back from various lawmakers. So I'm appreciative of that. It's really excellent, works smoothly, because otherwise, as a citizen, it can be a little daunting to figure out exactly who to send to and how do you find them and all that sort of thing. So thank you for making that smooth. Really appreciate the depth of your presentation today in giving us this update on the legislative package. It's just very exciting that we are at this moment, only 1 year after those recommendations came forth. And I know there's a lot more work to be done, but this is an amazing turnaround accomplishment. And hopefully we can be celebrating fully in 6 months with the process of implementation being underway.
Yes, happy to come back and talk about what passed.
And I put in the chat to everyone again the link to the Michigan Center for Youth Justice website if you're not sure how to find it. Thank you very much to all of our participants for joining us. And this recording of the session will be on the Westchester County League of Women Voters website within a week. All right.